y'all. I'm out here a little later. I don't have my mic. I can't find it. So I've moved the camera closer. I tested the audio. It sounds good, assuming we don't have a lot of background noise from, nature. Did you hear the rooster? Right on time. So I wanted to continue in chapter 5 today because there was so much there that I wanted to keep discussing, especially at the intersection of land and education, which I told y'all I'm an education scholar, I'm a race scholar, and so anything education I'm kind of going to dig in a little bit. But so far in the book, we've talked about how land ownership and access to land intersects with so many different things. It intersects with access to food, access to housing, access to labor, and overall independence, right? So if you have land, you aren't dependent on other people for work, for food, for housing, for any of it. So it gives this true freedom that happens when you have your own land. And so today, further in chapter 5, we started chapter 5 in the previous video, but today in chapter 5, we really get to see how land doesn't just intersect with the things I've listed already, but we talked about how it intersects with the Black church. The Black church operates as kind of this collective and mutual aid function where it's helping people access or bringing resources together so that the community can have more access to land. But in the second half of the chapter, she's talking about education and how schools require land, right? You can't just put a building on land you don't own necessarily. You have to have land, you have to have property. And so now we see that land intersects with access to education, especially for newly freed Black folks. And as I was reading, I was of course reminded of The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson, a really excellent book, super short, as you can see. But there's a lot of really great quotes here that talk about why it's so important that Black people educate ourselves and we not rely on the education of people that don't care for Black people, right? It's really dangerous to be educated by people that do not love you, do not care about you, do not have your best interest in mind, and in fact need your bodies for their system of oppression and for their system of capitalism. So we'll get into the rest of chapter 5 with Rooted, but I don't think she directly cites Woodson, but a lot of the ideas that she's talking about, especially when she brings up Audre Lorde, intersect with what Woodson was talking about. So again, another read that I highly recommend you check out at your leisure. Again, and the first few videos I talked about how reading across sources helps your comprehension and critical thinking skills, because if I can read something like Rooted and my brain goes, oh, I remember when I read in The Miseducation of the Negro X, Y, and Z, I'm drawing connections that help me with my analysis and help to deepen my thinking, right? So I'm not just relying on one source, which is a really valuable skill. So I don't want to read the whole thing. I think you should get the book. But there are a few things I want to point out. One, about how universities, oh my gosh, I will show you the picture here. First of all, she talks about something called the Morrill Act. Let's see if I can get this in here. There we go. So this is an incredible / terrifying map. And it says the Morrill Act gave 79,000 parcels of indigenous land totaling about 10.7 million acres to 52 land-grant universities to fund their endowments. So white universities. So 52 white universities were built on the stolen land of indigenous people. 10.7 million acres. That's unfathomable, right? And so the U.S. education system, particularly the college level, university level education system, is built on stolen land. I mean, the whole country is built on stolen land, right? But specifically, they took the land, they created a whole act, the Morrill Act, to justify stealing land from indigenous people, indigenous community, and tribes to create these universities. And then later, in a revision of the act, some HBCUs, I think they said 3, were also given some of this stolen land. And so it kind of explores how complicated solidarity can be in a constrained and white supremacist system, because often it's pitting us against each other. And Bria explores that contradiction, that conflict. But she also talks about, and this is where we get into Carter G. Woodson, about how there were a lot of white leaders, seemingly benevolent leaders, who started HBCUs and started schools for Black people, but had this very particular vision for how they would educate Black people and how they would educate Indigenous people. And so she names this man Samuel Chapman Armstrong, and he's this philanthropist, and he has a very specific vision for what type of education Black people needed. So it says local Black Virginians, including Hampton University students, were calling for sovereignty and self-determination. Armstrong believed he knew better and pushed back. Instead, he would accommodate the creation of a colonized agrarian South in which Black self-improvement would take place within a model set by elite whites and within a world controlled by them. Armstrong sought to educate the future laborers of the agricultural South, not to empower a subjugated class to resist their oppression. Workers only, never owners. Students, never teachers. Audre Lorde's warning about the master's tools being insufficient comes to mind. So she's referencing where Audre Lorde says that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So you can't rely on and believe that people who benefit from white supremacy would educate you in a way that would actually liberate you, right? And the students of Hampton University and the local folks of Virginia recognize that and are pushing back against it. But they're doing it on ground that is stolen land, first of all, and then second of all, under leadership that is white and is anti-white Black ownership, right? And so they're saying Black people can't be teachers, you can be a student, and you can learn from white leaders. So one thing she explores, again, I think this is a struggle for solidarity between people of color globally, but particularly in North America, when you have limited access to resources and there has to be a grab, right? And so she talks about how at the end of the 19th century, Black people and Indigenous communities are at a crossroads where Indigenous people are like, white people have, and the white government have betrayed us multiple times. They've moved us, they've broken treaties, all of that, and they're kind of stepping away and retreating from any type of interaction with that government. And then Black Americans kind of see that as an opportunity to get some land for themselves. And so she says, with each new piece of legislation, the 1887 Dawes Act, the Dawes Commission of 1893, the 1889 Land Run, Black folks claimed more and more acreage, though never more than the white Americans for whose benefits the legislation was intended. Further, as white American descended deeper inland to newer territories and states, Black people reclaimed the coastal South that was left behind. Some former plantation owners abandoned land that had been destroyed by the Union Army in favor of a fresh start. Others were beginning to see the signs of the land being too stripped from overplanting and not enough crop rotation. Ooh, I want to talk about that. Overplanting and not enough crop rotation. The University of Maryland estimates that about 60% of southern plantations were deserted post-Civil War. I didn't know that. A different paper in the American Economic Review affirms that white slaveholding families lost a significant amount of wealth directly following emancipation, but then recouped those losses within one or two generations. Seeing more economic opportunity out west and an easier path to those frontiers through the railroad boom, many prominent white families sold their land in Virginia and the Carolinas, as well as along the lower Mississippi River in Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi for pennies on the dollar to whoever they deemed foolish enough to purchase it. Other former slaves shifted their remaining fortunes from agricultural investment to textiles, manufacturing, and other industries up north that were beginning to boom. Property values across the South dropped and white people scrambled to salvage their network while Black people saw green, not money, but a new beginning. In his book, The Land Was Ours, Andrew Carl documents this moment in time where preparation met opportunity. Coastal lands that once generated considerable wealth for the South's slavocracy. I've never actually said that word, slavocracy. And sold for upwards of $5,000 per acre before the war could by the 1870s be fetched for $50 an acre or less. It goes from $5,000 per acre to $50 an acre. As they were before war and emancipation, forsaken and forgotten, the land of mosquitoes, predatory animals, dense forests, and sandy, non-arable soil. As a result, coastal zones became ripe for Black land ownership. So once it's undesirable and exploited and completely depleted, it becomes this great opportunity for Black people. The Black people who settled there were no fools. They knew the land was in need of rehabilitation. But some land was better than none. Accustomed to making $1 out of 15 cents, as we say, these new Black landowners got to work restoring the land. Some continued farming, whether for self-sustenance or as their primary family business. Others ventured into new terrain, opening resorts, beaches, and other spaces of recreation. Against all meticulously designed odds, by the turn of the century, Black Americans owned 1 million farms, making up approximately 14% of the nation's farmland, mostly across the South. Many Black folks hoped it was just the beginning of their newfound prosperity. Most white folks were betting on the opposite. And that is the end of chapter 5. And I just want to show you one more image here. See if I can, again, there we go. Don't mind my face on the side. So what I really want to reflect on is two things primarily. One, how land intersects with everything. It touches everything. In this chapter, we talk about how it touches education, because you have to have a place to go to go to school, right? To place a school building, to learn. And the importance of having and owning not just the land, but the space and the ideologies that are taught within the school, the curriculum, can't be overstated because of what Audre Lorde tells us. The master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house. Black people being taught that their inferiority is normal, that their place in the world is to be a worker, not a thinker, to be a follower, not a leader, to be a student, not a teacher, is harmful to not just our collective progress, but to our individuality, right? And so education is really, really important for the progress of the people, and its access to it is mediated through land. And I just love how she weaves that together. Now, the other side of it, the complicated part of it, is where does solidarity come in, right? When you're two groups of disempowered people under a system of white supremacy, you can be pitted against each other. And it's an old playbook, right? Powerful white people did it at the beginning of, before the United States was established, when they pitted poor white people against Black people. That's really what the project of whiteness has been. It's been a way to create class divide so that poor white people end up maintaining and supporting a system that is not in their best interest, right? And so disrupting solidarity is actually a really important strategy of white supremacy, which means by virtue of that, solidarity, building communities, building connections across different groups of people is a strategy for liberation and for empowerment. And so it's interesting to think about, and I know people talk about this all the time, especially in terms of like returning land to indigenous communities, all things of that nature. What would it look like for Black people, for indigenous people, for immigrant people, for Asian people, Hispanic people, for all of us who are battling and fighting under the system of white supremacy? What would it look like for us to have solidarity, to come together, to own or steward land together, to share in the resources of that? Because like I said in my last video, for us who have been disempowered and disenfranchised and have limited access to capital, individualism is limited. It can't get us where we need to go. But collective action has a lot more potential because it's exactly what they've been trying to keep us from having access to, right? They can limit our access to capital, but if they also limit our access to each other, then we're truly disempowered and truly disenfranchised. Because truthfully, if we don't have capital, but we have community, we have so much more because community can fill in the gaps, right? Community can provide food. Community can provide shelter, housing, protection, all of the things that the state is supposed to provide, community can provide. And when you don't have access to capital, community becomes your greatest resource. So disrupting community through your ideologies and through intentional efforts to steal resources from one group and reappropriate them to another group is a strategy of white supremacy that we have to be aware of and constantly resisting and battling against it. So if I could end with a reflection today, it would be on what opportunities are there for us to come together across differences, across groups, to resist collectively? And how does that intersect with land? I still think land ownership and land stewardship are still very relevant to our liberation and to our independence, but it may look a bit different given the fact that land is relied upon and used in different ways now. But as I see people move back into land ownership and stewardship and homesteading and farming, I think that we're returning back to a former way of living that is less dependent on capital, because we've seen the limits of capitalism and we've seen the limits of access to capital in general. And so in our decision to return to the land, I think you can't return to the land without returning to community as well, because otherwise you're just creating a system of individualism on the land that already existed in society and in a capitalist society. And so I don't think it's good enough for us to kind of retreat. I don't think retreat is what we have to do when we reclaim the land. I think return is what we have to do. We return to each other. We return to relying on and bartering and sharing and communalism, and hopefully we reclaim the parts of ourselves that were once lost due to the master's tools and the master system. Thank you for joining me as always. We're going to move into chapter 6 and 7, I think, jointly. Again, there's always just so much in the chapters, and I want to like hyper focus and go deep into one thing. But I don't know if we'll get through the book if I do that every time. So today I try to do a little bit of summary and then a little bit of reading, and I'll do some mix of that. You know, I'm trying. I'm figuring it out. But keep following along, keep subscribing, and I'm gonna keep posting. I'm gonna keep posting till we get through this whole book and the next book.